this book begins 1 year after they have left Egypt, and God speaks to them on Mount Sinai. And so this is where it starts. And then it goes through, you can break it up, really. I'm going to go over a couple of ways you can break this book up. One, you can look at the geographic saying. You can say, what happened in Mount Sinai? And then it gives several things that happened there. And then there's section 2, where it talks about what happened as they were wandering in the wilderness. And it shows you this 38 to 39 years of wandering. Now, in that 38, 39 years of wandering, it does not give you every detail. So you don't know every story. So understand that. It only highlights the stories that tell you things like the consequences of disobedience. It tells you the consequence of rebellion. It tells you the consequence of not listening and walking away from God. And so it tells you these significant events. So it starts at Mount Sinai. You've gotten the tabernacle up. You've learned, you've heard from Moses, and you've gotten the covenant, and you've gotten the commandments, and you've got the laws of purity. Now it tells you, now we got to deal with how do you walk. So Exodus and Leviticus tell you how to set up the tabernacle, and they tell you how to live in terms of how to live around God. Now, when you come to Numbers, it says, now I'm going to tell you how to live with God and with each other. You know, and so, and we learn in the second portion, what happens as you wander, as you go with God, what can I expect? And so this covers about 39 years from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, to Kadesh Barnea, which literally means this place where everything fell apart. You're gonna see the world gonna fall apart right here for them. And then it moves to a third section, which are the places where in the plains of Moab. Now, what's interesting about this, we call it the desert, but it's more of a wilderness than it was a desert. So a lot of times when we look at it in our minds, we see sand dunes and dust. But this, it was a mountainous wilderness area. Now, it was destitute. There was not a lot of, it wasn't a flourishing environment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything was desert. So when you see it, don't always think, desert and camels and everything else. So now, when we look at the authorship of the book of Numbers, because most of us see it that way, the Jews and the Samaritans all attribute the authorship of Numbers to Moses. So when you look at Second Temple Judaism, and if you were to ask a Jew or a Samaritan or anybody during that time, they would say, according to John 3 and 14, Acts 7, 1 Corinthians 10, that Moses was the writer of this. In fact, but there's also internal evidence. What do you mean external evidence? External evidence means, does anybody talk about the authorship outside of the book? The Jews and the Samaritans outside of the book of Numbers, they refer to the authorship in these particular texts. Internal evidence means, does the book of Numbers say anything about who wrote it? And so when I look at Numbers 32 and 2, it tells me, it says, now Moses wrote down, and Moses did this. And so the book internally says Moses wrote me. Externally, when we look at history, the Jews believed, the Samaritans believed, the early church believed that Moses was the author. And we believe that he's the author. Why? Because if you look at the first 5 books of the Pentateuch and how they're written, and when we look at the original language, they're all written generally the same kind of way. So it points to one author. Am making sense? So now you can go to my next slide now. You can go to my next slide. Thank you. So now, when we look at this idea, if you look at the book of Numbers, you can structure it this way, and this is a good way to structure it. You have one section that deals with the old generation. Chapters 1 through 12 focus on the idea of what happened with those who left Egypt. So the old generation, or the old heads, as we call them, or the people who refused to go in. So when I want to know what happened, and I want to know, man, the Bible does talk about some people who didn't go in, where would that be? That would be in the book of Numbers, chapters 1 through 12, where now Moses is dealing with that first generation, that generation who were slaves, that generation who got freed, but their problem was they got freed from Egypt, but Egypt was still in them. They were freed from the bondage of Egypt, but the mentality of the old was still in them. So it lets me know that when I get saved, and as I get saved, the first thing I got to deal with is my old mentality. My mentality about me, my mentality about you, my mentality about the world, and my mentality about church. Now, here's the deal. If I don't change that mentality, even though I've changed my location, if I don't change that mentality, even though I've changed even who I hang with, what that means for me is this. I can expect at some point I'm going to rebel against God, because God is not just about moving my location. He is not just about moving me. And remember, you can leave Egypt with jewelry, gold, and earrings and riches and still be broke mentally. So don't believe that because you got some bling bling and God is blessing you in this season, that literally that's a sign that you are walking within the will of God. Because this old generation, they left with a lot. But the problem was they didn't leave the right stuff. They didn't leave their old mentality there. Numbers 1 through 12, these first 12 chapters discuss this first group. And they have, and when you look at Numbers holistically, you can put it in sets of twos. There are two generations, the old generation and the young generation. There are two censuses. Censuses is where they counted, where Moses started counting people. This is why it's called the book of Numbers, because they were literally they did a census to count how many men of this age, how many people, and everything else. And so, once again, when it comes to those of you who don't like signing in, those of you who don't believe that you should register, those of you who don't believe that you should pull out an app and sign in that you're here, that God knows you're here, and everything else. So one of the first 5 books of the Bible deals specifically with the idea of numbers. i.e., God says there's a structure and an order to things. And you can't now spiritually try to spiritualize God's supernatural presence while you are acting in rebellion to order. Am I making sense? And so we learned that this group of people who have been blessed, who have seen the miracle working power of God, at the same time, they have bling, they have miracles. They know where God is. So don't lie to yourself and say, if I knew where God was, I would be obedient. If I knew where God was leading me, I could do it. If I was just clear in what God wanted, I would always do it. The book of Numbers says you lying. Because they were clear on where God was. They had signs of God's power. They knew that God had blessed them. And with all of that, they literally walked right into the land of promise and said, I'm not doing it. And so you can look at it, 2 generations, old generation, new generation. Y'all got me right there, right? 2 censuses. They do a census here and they do a census here. Or Moses does a census here because he has to recount. One at Mount Sinai, that's that first segment, and one in the plains of Moab, that's that second segment. So you see how you can look at it geographically, but it also aligns with this kind of structure also. And then you have this transition. Most writers call it the tragic transition, because this is when the wheel fell off the wagon. Everything fell apart. Now, remember, God has blessed, God has led, God has shown himself powerful, God has shown himself strong, God has shown himself faithful. And the people look at what God challenges them to do. What does he challenge them to do? He challenges them to walk into his promise. Now, I love this part because most of us would say, man, it's too hard. So sometimes what God asks me is too hard. God's saying, I promise you land, I'll walk you into it. I promise you deliverance. I guided you to deliverance. I walked you through. I fed you. I gave you water. I protected you. Your clothes didn't wrinkle. Your shoes didn't wear out. And so I've been more than faithful. So understand this. It lets you know that the faithfulness of God is not your issue. It is the faithlessness of man that's your issue. So what happened? They started having problems with God's leadership and God's structure and God's route, and they rebelled. In these 7 chapters, chapters 13 to 20, they began to have rebellion and began to push back against God's structure and his leadership. And what God does, even in those chapters, it's interesting. God keeps showing them over and over again, this is my structure. Because most of us, once again, we would say, well, I want to be clear, God. How do I know you chose this leader and not that leader? I want to be clear. How do I know this is the route, not that the route? Even in the book of Numbers, God said, they said, how do we know that you're going to work with, why should Aaron and those guys be the priests? They asked that question. Why did you choose them? God said, okay, I tell you what, find the leader from every tribe. Find the most spiritual man you can find. Have them all go to the river and then cut rods. And when they cut the rod, they're severing it from the root. So it has no more source of energy, nutrition, and growth. Have them all bring the rods, all people from the tribes, all those representatives, whoever y'all choose. And then y'all lay them down right here and leave them all right here. Right? Everybody write your name on it. So I'm gonna let you know. Y'all want to know, how do we know? You need a sign. Here's a sign. So now, all of the leaders put down their rods, these long plants, these long reef-like plants, and they lay them down. Only one started to bud. That's what we call Aaron's rod. That budded. So when you even see that terminology, don't be country like me and not understand what that means for 20 years. I was like, Aaron rod that budded. And I could say it, but I had no idea what they were talking about. Literally, what it literally means is that his rod then began to grow, and there were branches and leaflets that popped up off of his rod, even though it had been separated from his natural source of growth and nutrition and energy. And it was a sign to everybody that that's the guy I'm choosing. So now, even with that, listen, Miriam and Aaron said, "Why we don't like Moses' choice? We don't like his wife. We don't like this stuff about him. We think that God speaks to us, because remember, Miriam was the one that when they crossed the Red Sea, she pulled out the tambourine." And she said, my king, my God reigns. She declared that he's reigning. She got the tambourine. She led praise and worship service that day. She prophesied. She was used by God. But then her problem was, get this, saints of God, she was too close to him to respect God's authority. That her relationship with him and her ties to him made him too common. And because of her commonality, she began to question his decision making. And she and Aaron began to question it. And so they said, is Moses the only one who God speaks to? God speaks to us. And Aaron was like, I've been with God. I done seen God move, because I was working with Moses. So understand this. Just because you're with the man of God, when you see the miracles happen, doesn't mean that it's you. And so God then calls a meeting because they declared they wanted a meeting. If you keep asking God for a meeting, you're going to mess around and get one. So they had a meeting, and literally God said, Moses, y'all all meet with me in the morning at the tabernacle, at the tent of meeting, at the place where I shine, and the place where I dwell. And then Aaron sitting there, Miriam sitting right there, and Moses. They both look at Miriam, and she's white with leprosy. So now, she has a skin disease. She gets a skin disease, and now some say, well, if Aaron was rebellious too, why didn't he give it to Aaron? Because Aaron was going to be part of the priesthood, and he could not make him impure, and then turn around and use him for the priesthood. And this was, but Aaron, once Aaron saw Miriam. Lord, forgive me. And so, once again, so you would think that, listen, we got Aaron's rod, we got Aaron and Miriam, and then you even had Korah, who decided at this time, this all happened during this transition, all these rebellions against leadership. And Korah decided that he was going to lead, and that several of the men decided they're going to be with him. And literally, God said, y'all want a meeting? Let's have a meeting. So they all had a meeting, and then he said, Moses said, say this. He says, whoever on the lower side, come over here. So Moses declares, he says, whoever on the lower side, y'all come a step over here. And those who were on the lower, on Moses' side, and the lower side, they stepped over here. And Korah and his people were sitting over there. And then the Bible says, and the ground opened up and swallowed them whole and closed up. It wasn't a boulder coming down. It wasn't, literally, the ground said open, they fell in and closed while they were still yelling, ah! And Moses said, anybody else want to meet? So, but here's the thing about Numbers. Numbers shows you that with all of that evidence, you will still walk away from the very promises of God. With all that present evidence that you've seen, because most of us would say, if I saw a Red Sea, if I saw plagues, if I saw the firstborn die, if I saw the ground open up, if I saw a rise button and I saw people get leprosy, that would be enough, and I saw grapes, that would be enough for me that I would say to God, whatever you say, Lord. But Numbers shows you that rebellion is not about blessings. Rebellion is not about clarity. Rebellion is not about signs. Rebellion is not about blessings or deliverance. Rebellion is about not taking that old you and killing it. Am I making sense? And so Numbers helps you to see that. So I'm saying to all of us, that those that are watching and those that are streaming, you have to remember, look at the book of Numbers and ask yourself, when is the last time I changed? Look at the book of Numbers and say, can God challenge me? Look at the book of Numbers and say, can God ask me for more than I want to give? Look at the book of Numbers. Now you see how I got quiet? It gets quiet. Look at the book, because the book of Numbers helps you to understand. You're like, whoa, it's not as simple as I try to make it. And so there's a tragic transition where there is rebellion. This rebellion happens. And now because of this rebellion, they walk up to the promised land. So they're not looking for the promised land. God leads them directly to the promised land. And literally, they decide in one night I will not go in. After all of that, they make a decision. No, I'm not going in. And because the spies had spent 40 days, because he told them to spy the land. And so they went into the land for 40 days. So they had 40 days to collect evidence. And when they came back and the spies had an evil report, and they decided that the giants were too big and the fruit was not enough. And when they looked at that, they said, we're not going in. So God said, for every day you are walking in the promised land, you're going to spend a year in wandering. So that's why they had 40 years of wandering. Now, am I making sense? So we had the old generation, the tragic transition, chapters 13 through 20, and then we had the new generation, chapters 21 through 36. So there was a census here at Mount Sinai, at this geographic location, and there was a census here. There was a law given here, and it was reiterated here because we had a new generation. So that's why it has two generations, two censuses, two sets of instructions. Not because they were unclear, because we're talking about two different generations now. Does it make sense? You know, and Moses now, at this point, at the end of Numbers, he is 120 years old. And he has been leading them for 80 years. He's been leading them for 40 years. He was and God then brings them on home. Why? Because the people refused to go in. So once again, saints of God, your problem is not your leadership. Your problem is not your clarity. Your problem is not your blessings. Your problem is not your sign. Your problem is you simply refuse to do what you know the Lord is telling you to do.
Thank you for worshiping with us today. If you liked this message, you can find the rest at cmllcstore.com. We invite you to join us again for our extraordinary worship services every Sunday at 10:30 a.m., Sundays at 4 p.m., and Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Central, where Dr. Moody teaches how to understand the Bible, and you can get all your biblical questions answered. We look forward to connecting with you. We ask that you subscribe to The Rock ATX on YouTube and follow The Rock ATX on Facebook and Instagram to stay connected to all The Rock is doing. You can also get connected on our website at therockatx.org. Again, thank you for worshiping with us, and be blessed.